Chapter 885. After leaving the palace, Tang Nuyu grabbed Xiao Jin's arm and said happily, "Xiao Jin, I'm so happy. I was worried that the Empress would stop us because of your identity. What should we do then? Now that the Empress has personally given the order, I don't have to worry so much. I can be with you happily." Xiao Jin was very frustrated, but he couldn't show it. After all, this was indeed something to be happy about given his current persona. "Xiao Jin, I'll go back immediately and choose a good day to get things done." Xiao Jin put on a fake smile and was not happy at all. He cursed Tang Guo countless times in his heart. Why was that Empress so troublesome? Because of this incident, he didn't get in touch with the two of them. Thinking of this, he was even angrier. "Xiao Jin, you don't seem happy. Do you not want to marry me, or do you think it's unfair to be my concubine?" Tang Nuyu stopped smiling and looked lonely. "If you don't want to, I'll go back and explain to the Empress immediately." Xiao Jin quickly stopped her. "No, you misunderstood. I just feel that it's too surprising." "Really?" What else could Xiao Jin say? He hugged Tang Nuoyu and revealed a loving expression. He looked at her affectionately, and his voice was filled with boundless love. "Of course, I'm happy to be with you, That's good." Tang Nuyu lay in Xiao Jin's arms and smiled. In her lowered eyes, there was a calculation that Xiao Jin couldn't see. These men cheated her feelings and didn't hesitate to sacrifice their bodies. Every day, they pretended to love her deeply in front of her. She didn't know if they wanted to vomit. After Tang Nuyu returned to the residence, she became busy as expected. The people assigned to her by the late emperor were absolutely loyal. If she was still a fool in the past, these people would definitely hesitate about her decision and think about whether it would bring her trouble. Now that the Moon King's brain had returned to normal, it meant that there would be endless possibilities in the future. Of course, they had never thought of harming the Empress. Instead, it was a Moon King with a normal brain. Compared to a Moon King who was an idiot, the difference in status and treatment was huge. In order to show that she valued Xiao Jin, Tang Nuyu spread the news that she wanted to take in a secondary husband. The whole imperial city knew about it. Under her intentional spreading of the news quickly spread to the state of Qi. The people of the state of Qi were also shocked. Their sixth prince was actually willing to be a woman's concubine. This was truly shameful. Xiao Jin hadn't completely lost track of the state of Qi. When he heard this, he was furious. He also mentioned the other two men in Tang Nuyu's mansion. One was her husband, Dan Gu, and the other was her husband, Yin Qiu. Ever since Tang Nuyu's brain returned to normal, she hadn't met the two of them. They were very surprised by Tang Nuyu's sudden recovery. At the same time, they were waiting to see how they would get along with this normal prince in the future. They completely didn't expect that the Moon King would take in a secondary husband before they even met. This time, the two of them had no choice but to meet Tang Nuyu. When Tang Nuyu saw the two men walking over, one was wearing a veil and the other was limping, she laughed hysterically in her heart. However, she put on a silly and sweet expression and asked her confidant, "Who are they?" Dan Gu was speechless. Yin Qiu was speechless. "Your Highness, the one wearing a veil is your husband, and the other is your husband, Yin Qiu." Chapter 886. Today's weather was good. After dealing with political affairs, Tang Guo wanted to go to the imperial garden to bask in the sun. Before the late emperor passed away, he did not leave her any mess and even solved many problems for her. As the empress, as long as there were no major problems, West Saint Country would not be in trouble. In her previous life, it was because Tang Nuyu was too stupid that those people took advantage of the loophole. So, she was occasionally very free. Plus, she was not the real empress. She had been the empress several times, so it was easy for her to deal with those old foxes. Later, she thought that there were people who wanted to meet her in the imperial garden every day. Now she did not want to be entangled with those men. So, she went to Huangfu Jingcheng's place. Where is Huangfu? Huangfu is practicing swordsmanship. Your Majesty, do you want to invite Huangfu over? No, Tang Guo waved her hand. I remember that there is a nice garden in Huangfu's palace, right? Yes. Then take me there. Everyone thought that Tang Guo was going to admire the flowers. They did not expect that she would ask someone to bring a lounge chair and sleep beside the flowers in the warm sun. The people around Tang Guo also looked at each other. When did Her Majesty become so careless? In their opinion, it was careless to sleep in a place other than the Empress's palace. They did not know that their Empress was no longer the original Empress. She dared to sleep in the sun like this because she had absolute confidence that she would be safe. Tang Guo was not sleeping either. It was the system that told her that there was a situation in Tang Nuyu's residence. When she was watching, it was Tang Nuyu's husband and husband, Yin Qiu, who went to see the other party. The two of them had not recovered because they were badly beaten by Tang Nuyu last time. When she heard Tang Nuyu walk up to Mr. Wang and ask with a puzzled expression, "Mr. Wang, why are you wearing a veil?" the corners of Tang Guo's lips curled up. Tang Nuyu was very similar to her in one aspect, holding a grudge. Mr. Dongay was wearing a veil. He came to see Tang Nuyu to sound her out, but he didn't expect that Tang Nuyu would ask him why he was wearing a veil. Did she not know why he was wearing a veil? Shan Gu really didn't know how to answer. She couldn't say, "Your Highness, I was whipped by you." Before he could answer, Tang Nuyu turned to Yin Qiu and asked curiously, "Why are you limping? Are you born with a bad leg?" Yin Qiu, "Fuck you, born with a bad leg." Dan Guk felt a little better. It seemed that His Highness did not remember what had happened before. Thinking back to that day when the whip hit his face, he couldn't bring himself to like the person in front of him. "Your Highness, we're here to congratulate Your Highness on taking in a secondary husband." Shan Gu made her intentions clear. Tang Nuyu nodded. "So that's the case. All right, this prince understands." She pulled on Xiao Jin, who was feeling a little uncomfortable. "This is Xiao Jin, the sixth prince of the state of Qi. He will be this prince's concubine soon." Xiao Jin's expression was not very good. He hated it when people mentioned that he was the sixth prince of the state of Qi in the West Saint Nation. "Xiao Jin, are you unhappy?" Tang Nuyu pulled on Xiao Jin's arm, playing the role of a naive and sweet girl. "You don't have to care about them. This prince only likes you." She glanced at Shan Gu and Yin Qiu, then waved her hand. Chapter 887. You can leave now. Don't come to see me if there's nothing important. Shan Gu and Yin Qiu's expressions changed immediately. Even if they didn't like Tang Nuyu didn't give them any face because of Xiao Jin. How could they still have a good impression of Xiao Jin? At that time, the two of them looked at Xiao Jin like knives. Xiao Jin also felt a headache. His initial plan was to infiltrate the Moon King's residence and ally with these two people around the Moon King. After all, he had investigated and found that these two people were very dissatisfied with the Moon King. It would be very easy to get them to defect to his side. Then, it would be perfectly justifiable for them to ally with the two people in the palace and use Tang Nuyu's identity to fight against the Empress. He didn't expect that because of Tang Nuyu's mental problems, she would leave a bad impression on him. If he wanted these two to believe him, he didn't know how much effort he would have to put in. Tang Nuyu sensed Xiao Jin's thoughts and sneered in her heart. Live together harmoniously. Dream on. What she wanted was to sit in the residence and watch her husband fight. The more they fought, the happier she would be. She had learned all these from them. Then Shang-gu will take her leave. Yin Qiu will also take her leave. Before the two of them left, they didn't forget to glance coldly at Xiao Jin, which made Xiao Jin's head hurt. After they left, Tang Nuyu hugged Xiao Jin's arm and smiled happily. Xiao Jin, don't worry. I won't like them. I like you the most. Xiao Jin took a deep breath and touched Tang Nuyu's cheek. Okay. He was worried. What should he do next? Shang-gu and Yin Qiu were very hostile towards him. It seemed that he still had to use Tang Nuyu's identity to enter the palace and discuss with the two of them. Tanghua saw that there would be nothing fun here, so she closed her eyes and fell asleep. With the help of the system, there shouldn't be any problems. Moreover, she believed that there wouldn't be any problems in her husband's palace. It was only after Jing Qing finished practicing his sword that he learned that the Empress had come. He put away his sword and asked, "Why didn't you report earlier?" "It was His Majesty who ordered us not to disturb the imperial husband's sword practice." Jing Qing immediately recalled the brilliant smile the Empress had given him. His heart skipped a beat for no reason. He took the sword into the room and quickly took a bath. After changing into clean clothes, he was led to the garden by the palace servants. When he walked into the garden, he saw the woman with her eyes closed beside the flowers. At that moment, he stopped in his tracks. When he came back to his senses, he walked over quietly without making a sound, as if he was afraid of waking up the person who was sleeping. "Your Majesty." A palace servant saw him and wanted to salute him, but he quickly raised his hand to stop them. The palace servant didn't want to disturb Tanghua, so he only bowed and didn't say anything else. Jing Qing sat quietly on the stone bench. He originally wanted to look at the flowers in the garden, but as he looked, he couldn't help but look at the person beside the flowers. He was entranced. She looked like she was sleeping, and the corners of her lips were raised. She was obviously having a beautiful dream. The Empress in her sleep was really quiet and looked very harmless. He couldn't help but think of how she was serious in front of others, but smiling in front of him. So, which side was the real Empress? He took a sip of tea, but his gaze still didn't move away. At that moment, Tanghua opened her eyes, and he was so shocked that he almost dropped the teacup. Fortunately, his martial arts were good, and he quickly caught it. But he saw that there was some confusion in those beautiful eyes, and there were even some tears. The way she looked at him was very confused. She probably didn't notice that he was looking at her attentively. Chapter 888. Jing Qing had just breathed a sigh of relief when he heard Tanghua say, "Imperial husband." "Yes." He hurriedly answered and put the teacup aside. Hearing that soft voice, his heart felt like it was scratched by a cat. He didn't look at the Empress's face. He didn't know when, but his attention was easily attracted to her. "Help me up." Hearing this, Jing Cheng's heart was complicated, but he still went up and helped her up. The Empress's body was very fragrant, really very fragrant. It wasn't that he was imagining things, but that he subconsciously thought so. The Empress was still a bit thin. When he helped her up, he felt like he was touching her bones. He remembered that she had to wake up before dawn to attend court, and after court, she still had to approve memorials. Although she still had some free time every day, she wasn't as free as the men in the harem. If something happened somewhere, she basically wouldn't have time to rest for a month. She was only 15 years old, and still an underage girl. Thinking about it, Jing Qing felt some pity, and couldn't help but feel that the Empress was a bit pitiful. It really wasn't easy to manage such a big country at such a young age. It was said that the late Emperor's health wasn't good, and the Empress's sister Tang Nuyu was born a fool. The birth of the Empress represented the future of the entire West Saint Empire. She was raised as the heir since young, and basically didn't have any happy childhood. Imperial husband, are you done practicing? Yes. Jing Qing hurriedly answered. He felt that the Empress's voice was a bit soft. Of course, he thought it was an auditory hallucination. Have you eaten? Practicing will consume a lot of energy, you must eat more. Maybe she just said it casually, but Jing Qing was still a bit happy. I haven't had time. Head steward, go bring some food, according to Imperial husband's taste. Next time, if Imperial husband practices, prepare the food first, so he doesn't starve. Tang Guo waved her hand. A series of orders made Jing Cheng's heart feel strange. The Empress was too concerned about him. He had to say, after being in the palace for so many years, he was still a bit happy to be cared for by the Empress. He was the Empress's husband, and it was best if he could get along with her. Currently, their relationship was really good. Of course, he didn't expect the Empress to like him that much. On the day he became the Imperial husband, he understood that in the future, he might not be like his parents, having a simple love. However, it was still not bad to be able to support and live in harmony with the Empress. No matter what, he was still a man. His manly nature did not disappear just because he was in the West Saint Nation. He wouldn't die just because he couldn't obtain the Empress's devoted love. At most, he would be a little disappointed. Soon, the food was brought over. Tang Guo propped up her chin and looked at the motionless Jing Qing with a smile. Imperial hubby, eat. You've just finished practicing and need to replenish your food. You don't have to be polite in front of me. Jing Qing recalled that he had revealed his true colors in front of the Empress the last time, so he decided not to pretend anymore. Then Jing Qing won't stand on ceremony. He was indeed a little hungry. The Empress was so generous that she didn't mind him eating a lot at all. His impression of the Empress was also getting better and better. He thought that with such an Empress ruling over the West Saint Nation, the West Saint Nation would definitely get better and better. Of course, he would also do his best to help the Empress and be loyal to her forever. He would never betray the Empress, otherwise he would be letting down her good intentions. He thought of the men in the harem, and felt some pity for the Empress. Chapter 889. System, ha 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 ha, host, looking at your appearance, Imperial husband is really loyal. No matter how good you are to him, he will still think about how to be loyal to you. Host, do you have any thoughts now? Tang Guo, actually, it's not wrong for a man to be reserved sometimes. If he likes someone the moment he comes, isn't that a bit too hasty? He has no memories and hasn't spent much time with me. Isn't it normal that he doesn't have any thoughts about me now? System, okay, he understands. The host always has many reasons that he can't refute. Jing Qing swept away all the food on the table. After eating, he habitually felt awkward. Then, he saw that the Empress didn't look at him differently. Instead, she was still smiling. Imperial husband, is the usual food enough? Why don't I get someone to add some more for you? It's enough. Jing Qing quickly replied. He really wasn't hungry. The food was enough for him to eat. Even if it wasn't enough, he had a small kitchen in the palace. He could ask someone to make some for him. That's good. Tang Guo nodded and asked, how many years has it been since Imperial husband entered the palace? The late emperor's health was not good, so he settled Jing Qing early on. After passing the throne to the original owner, Jing Qing entered the palace. Counting the time, it had been 4 or 5 years. 5 years. Then you haven't been home, right? Speaking of home, Jing Qing also missed it and nodded honestly. No. He was still a little envious of Nan Yunchuan and Su Qing. These two had just been allowed to return home a while ago. It could be seen that it was still useful to gain the Empress's favor. Pick a time, I'll accompany you back. Jing Qing, I almost threw the bowl away. Was the Empress serious? Tang Guo's beautiful eyes were fixed on Jing Chang's face. Imperial husband. Are you surprised? It's a surprise. Jing Qing was excited. Of course, it was a good thing to be able to go home. However, the Empress wanted to personally accompany him back. This wasn't good, right? Then when do you think it's good? I'm not too busy with political affairs recently, so I can accompany you back at any time. Jing Qing calmed down. The Empress planned to personally accompany him home. Wasn't it a little too ostentatious? So he said, why don't you let Jing Qing go back by himself? Of course, he didn't want to miss the opportunity to visit his family. Perhaps this would be the only time in his life. Although he was the imperial husband who could summon his father every month, this was different from going home in person. How can that be? You are the imperial husband. This is your first time returning home, so you must be accompanied by Zhen, Tang Guo said with a smile. Zhen will be an adult soon, so it's time for Zhen to accompany imperial husband back home. Speaking of adulthood, Jing Qing had a lot of thoughts in his mind. Now that the Empress had reached adulthood, it meant that she would begin to visit the harem. No wonder the Empress had been paying more attention to him recently. It turned out that what the Empress wanted him to do was to accompany her in giving birth to her child. He hadn't guessed wrong, had he? After all, the successor of the Empress was very important. As he thought about it, Jing Chang's ears turned red. He did have to cooperate when it came to giving birth to a child. However, the Empress's lack of clarity had almost caused him to misunderstand. Then the day after tomorrow. I wonder if Your Majesty has the time. He was very clear about his own status. Since the Empress had praised him, he naturally had to be tactful. In the future, if the Empress really had his child, he would definitely protect the child while he was in the palace. He would not withdraw from anything that should not be withdrawn. Chapter 890. I'm very curious. His ears are so red. What is he thinking about? Tang Guo communicated with the system, this fellow's old habits can't be changed. System, hee, isn't it all because of you? The day after tomorrow, we have time. Head steward, go and pick some things. When you accompany imperial husband home, bring them along. Tang Guo didn't stay for long at Jing Chang's place because the palace servant reported that Nan Yunchuan wanted to see her. Thinking of such a person, she decided to go and see him. Seeing that Jing Chang's smile had disappeared, she laughed in her heart and stood up. She was about to walk out, but she walked to Jing Chang's side. Jing Qing didn't quite understand. In fact, he did feel a little uncomfortable in his heart. The Empress was really outstanding, but she was the Empress. It was impossible for him to have her alone. Imperial husband. Your Majesty, if you are busy, you can go. Jing Qing sighed in his heart. If the Empress continued to treat him well, he really couldn't help but like her very much. Tang Guo pulled Jing Chang's sleeve. Imperial husband, why are you suddenly unhappy? Your Majesty, is it because I want to see Nan Yunchuan? Jing Qing was speechless. If he didn't admit it, he would be lying to the monarch. If he admitted it, he would be jealous. For a moment, he really didn't know what to say. Imperial husband, you don't have to care. We only care about you. Tang Guo raised her chin and looked at Jing Chang's face. She said seriously, Imperial husband, you will understand in the future. She let go of Jing Chang's sleeve, don't be unhappy. If there is a good sword manual, we will ask someone to send it to you. After saying that, Tang Guo left. The moment Jing Qing was pulled by the Empress, his heart was beating fast. At that time, he had an impulse to pull her into his embrace. In the end, he restrained himself because she was the Empress. Thinking of this, Jing Qing was a little annoyed. The Empress's words to him made the discomfort in his heart dissipate. So, was the Empress explaining to him why she wanted to go to Nan Yunchuan? It wasn't because she cared about Nan Yunchuan, but because of other reasons. Thinking of this, Jing Qing was a little inconceivable. It was getting harder and harder to understand the Empress's thoughts. Imperial husband, do you want to continue practicing the sword? Everyone in Jing Qing Palace knew Jing Chang's habits. As long as he had nothing to do, he would practice his sword. Now that the Empress had already left, according to the imperial husband's personality, he would definitely be engrossed in practicing the sword again. But this time, Jing Qing waved his hand. I'm not practicing anymore. Jing Qing suddenly recalled the scene he had seen in the garden and said, let's paint today. The scene in his mind couldn't be erased no matter how hard he tried. He really wanted to draw it. The eunuch didn't understand, but still did as Jing Qing said. On this side, Tang Guo left the palace in the capital. Not long after, she saw Nan Yunchuan waiting in the imperial garden. Your Majesty. When Nan Yunchuan saw Tang Guo, he immediately cupped his hands and bowed. When Tang Guo called out to him, he stood up straight. His peach blossom eyes were focused on Tang Guo. He hesitated for a moment before asking, Your Majesty, did you go to the imperial husband's side just now? Tang Guo replied. Yunchuan, why are you looking for Jin? When Nan Yunchuan saw the faint smile on the corner of Tang Guo's mouth, he felt much more at ease. Yunchuan is here to thank your Majesty. Thank your Majesty for letting Yunchuan go home to visit his family. Tang Guo nodded. How is your father? He's already much better. Thank you for your concern, your Majesty. Nan Yunchuan paused and said, Last time, I heard that your Majesty likes flower tea, so Yunchuan prepared a lot. Chapter 891. I wonder if your Majesty is free today. Of course, Tang Guo wouldn't answer that she wasn't free and followed Nan Yunchuan to his palace. Looking at Nan Yunchuan's smooth and flowing flower tea, her expression didn't change much. Only the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. She wasn't as relaxed as she was in Jingqing Palace. The chief steward who had followed her since she was young had long discovered that Her Majesty treated the imperial husband differently. He wasn't sure before, but now he understood very clearly that the only person Her Majesty cared about was the imperial husband. After drinking Nan Yunchuan's flower tea, Tang Guo praised him a few times and rewarded him with many things. After saying some words of concern, as usual, she was ready to leave. Nan Yunchuan quickly said, If your Majesty wants to drink flower tea in the future, you might as well come to Yunchuan. Okay. Tang Guo turned around with a smile on her face. Yunchuan's tea skills are indeed not bad. By the way, I'll allow you to return home once a month, how about it? Nan Yunchuan couldn't believe it at all and looked at Tang Guo in shock. Seeing Tang Guo's beautiful eyes staring at him, his heart couldn't help but skip a beat. Was he about to get the Empress's heart? Thinking of this, his heartbeat couldn't be controlled. At that moment, his heart really beat for the young woman in front of him. But he quickly reacted. The person he was going to overthrow in the future was the Empress in front of him. His goal was to gain her trust. Of course, it would be best if he could get her sincerity. As long as he could get the Empress's sincerity, it would be easy for him to do anything. If the Empress allowed him to return home to visit his family once a month, he would be able to do a lot of things. He still refused. Of course, Tang Guo wouldn't let him refuse. In the end, Nan Yunchuan happily agreed. From that day on, Tang Guo would be invited by Nan Yunchuan almost every day. Occasionally, Su Qing would appear to show her face. But all the men in the harem knew that Her Majesty the Empress doted on Nan Yunchuan the most. Some time ago, the Empress accompanied the imperial husband home. They thought that the Empress doted on the imperial husband the most. After returning to the palace, the Empress didn't often go to see the imperial husband. Every day, she would go to Nan Yunchuan's place to sit for a while. They understood that the Empress was at most respectful to the imperial husband. As for Nan Yunchuan, it was true love. If you continue like this, the Empress will definitely trust you, and it will be much easier for us to do things. Su Qing changed her usual sad look. Her cold eyes were full of calculations. When she saw that Nan Yunchuan was distracted, she couldn't help but pat the table. Yunchuan. What's wrong? Nan Yunchuan came back to his senses. He had merely thought of the days he had spent with the Empress recently. The Empress had indeed treated him very well. He felt a little regretful in his heart. If the Empress had not been the Empress, perhaps he would have been able to survive. Su Qing immediately saw through Nan Yunchuan's thoughts and warned, "Brother Yunchuan, don't lose your heart. Don't forget, she is the Empress of the West Saint Empire. If he treats you well today, he might treat someone else well tomorrow. Don't tell me you're willing to stay in the harem forever just because she's good to you, so that the men of the West Saint Empire will never have a chance to rise again." "I understand." Nan Yunchuan put away what he shouldn't have thought about before. Su Qing still reminded him, "It's good that you understand. Don't give up our ideals just because the Empress is gentle to you." Got it. Chapter 892. Tang Guo, who was in the palace, heard the conversation between the two men and laughed. This Su Qing, her mind is really clear. Tang Guo lowered her eyes. However, how many people can really be clear-headed all the time? The system trembled in the corner and did not dare to interrupt. However, they are indeed very courageous. The thinking of women and men is indeed so different. Most women, from their point of view, like to do most of the things they like to do is to please the emperor. Men, on the other hand, are thinking of ways to overthrow this country ruled by women. Actually, we just have different standpoints. But since I am here, they are destined to lose. The system deeply agreed. It was indeed different standpoints. It could still understand this point. These men, for their own purposes, did not hesitate to sacrifice their looks and put down their dignity to please women. They were indeed very courageous. "Host, what are you going to do next?" "I don't have any ideas. The West Holy Empire is very stable. As long as I don't lose my mind, they won't be able to make any trouble. Recently, I will try my best to treat them better." Tang Guo narrowed her eyes. In the future, they will miss the days in the palace. These two people had already planned to meet Xiao Jin outside the palace every month. It was estimated that they would also meet Tang Nuyu. If the host did not intervene, they would curry favor with Tang Nuyu like in her previous life. Moreover, they would inform Tang Nuyu that the host was going to harm her. Let them go. Tang Guo did not care what these people wanted to do next, but she was still curious about Tang Nuyu's next reaction. When they leave the palace, they will go see my imperial husband. It had been a few days since she saw Jing Qing. She did not know how that guy was doing. At this time, Jing Qing had already returned from his sword practice. Looking at the sleeping beauty hanging on the wall, a smile unconsciously appeared on his face. Imperial husband, should we invite His Majesty over? As people around Jing Qing, how could they not know that their imperial husband was interested in His Majesty? But recently, His Majesty had not come to the imperial husband's place, and they were very anxious. Seeing that His Majesty was about to reach adulthood, if he was bewitched by Nan Yunchuan, Su Qing, and the others, where would their imperial husband's position in the palace be? Jing Qing glanced at the people around him and said, "No need." He had already observed that His Majesty was not sincere to those two people. As for how to observe, of course, when no one was paying attention, he secretly used his qinggong to fly to the fake mountains, roofs, and other corners. He had seen with his own eyes that His Majesty did not show a very happy smile in front of Nan Yunchuan and the others. She would not be able to sleep peacefully like she did at his place. Only in front of him would she smile and not hide her thoughts at all. Therefore, the person His Majesty cared about was him. The corners of Jing Chang's mouth curled up. He didn't care much about Tang Guo going to other palaces. On this day, Tang Guo was invited by Nan Yunchuan again. Just as she was chatting happily with Nan Yunchuan, she suddenly glanced at the corner and met Jing Chang's gaze. Jing Chang was seen by her, but he had no intention of hiding. Of course, he had no intention of walking out. She smiled at him and had no intention of calling him out. When Nan Yunchuan realized that something was wrong, Tang Guo's smile was still gone, and Jing Qing was not in his original position. "What's wrong with His Majesty?" Tang Guo shook her head, "Nothing." Nan Yunchuan was suspicious. He felt that His Majesty must have seen something just now. Chapter 893. Imperial Husband, Her Majesty has already seen you. Why don't you go over? Jing Qing walked quickly to his palace and said in a good mood, "Since I've seen her, there's no need to go over. Go back to the palace to practice the sword." The palace people were puzzled and couldn't help but mutter in their hearts. "Imperial Husband, if you continue like this, you will completely lose Her Majesty the Empress." Nan Yunchuan clearly felt that Tang Guo's mood had improved a lot. After observing for a while, he did not see anyone else. He thought that it was because the Empress felt that it was very pleasant to get along with him. "Your Majesty, tomorrow is the time when Yunchuan returns home once a month." "Oh, so it's like that." Tang Guo paused. "Later, I'll ask the general steward to bring you to pick some ginseng herbs for your father." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Nan Yunchuan was sincerely grateful. These days, the Empress had indeed treated him very well. "Is there anything Your Majesty wants?" "When Yunchuan returns, I'll bring it to Your Majesty." Tang Guo shook her head, "I don't want anything." "Then Yunchuan will buy it as he sees fit. When the time comes, Your Majesty, please don't dislike it." Tang Guo smiled faintly, "No matter what Yunchuan gives me, I won't dislike it." Her gaze fell on Nan Yunchuan's face. Perhaps it was a guilty conscience, but Nan Yunchuan did not dare to look directly at her. The hands hidden in his sleeves clenched into fists. If the Empress was not the Empress, he might really be tempted by her and spend the rest of his life with her. Unfortunately, why was she the Empress? No matter how good she was to him, their positions were different. "Then when Yunchuan returns, I'll make flower tea for Your Majesty." Tang Guo nodded, "All right, then I'll wait." The next day, Su Qing and Nan Yunchuan returned home together. The men in the palace, except for Jing Qing, all gritted their teeth in hatred towards the two of them. Not only did these two gain the favor of Her Majesty, but they also received the benefits of returning home once a month. They were really scheming. The men in the palace could not sit still anymore, so they came to find Jing Qing. However, Jing Qing had already expected it. The palace gates were closed, and they could not see anyone. They wanted to see the Empress, but they were not Su Qing and Nan Yunchuan. The Empress would not see them at all. And their Empress, after Su Qing and Nan Yunchuan returned home, sneaked into Jing Chang's palace. At that time, Jing Qing was practicing his sword. Tang Guo still didn't disturb Jing Qing. She just stood by the side and watched the handsome man who was dancing with his sword. In this harem, other than Su Qing and Nan Yunchuan, the only normal man was probably Jing Qing. When Jing Qing finished practicing, he realized that Tang Gua had arrived at some point. He hurriedly walked in front of her and was about to bow. Imperial husband, there's no need to stand on ceremony. Tang Gua's arrival made Jing Qing somewhat happy. Would your majesty like some tea? If it's personally brewed by his majesty, I will drink it. Jing Qing subconsciously said, could it be that your majesty doesn't like the tea brewed by Nan Yunchuan? Tang Gua's face was full of smiles. Imperial husband's tea is still the best. I like it the most. Then I'll go right away. Jing Qing held his sword and walked quickly. If he didn't leave now, he was afraid that the Empress would see his red ears clearly. That would be a bit embarrassing. Jing Qing quickly washed up and finally came over with a tea set. He began to make tea for Tang Gua. During this time, he felt Tang Gua's gaze. His hands trembled and he almost spilled the tea. Tang Gua supported her chin with one hand and looked straight at Jing Qing. Why aren't you curious? Why did I treat Nan Yunchuan and Su Qing like that? Chapter 894. They were even allowed to return home once a month. On the contrary, Yu, the imperial husband, did not receive such treatment. Imperial husband, do you feel uncomfortable in your heart? Jing Qing quickly replied, no. The Empress had already made it obvious enough. He was not a person who liked to be jealous. Just based on the fact that the Empress had said these words in front of him without hiding anything, it could prove that the other party really cared about him. Moreover, no one knew that the Empress looked especially good when she smiled, and even took an afternoon nap in his palace without any precaution. It could be seen that the Empress trusted him. How the Empress treated Nan Yunchuan and Su Qing, she must have her own motives. It seems that imperial husband doesn't care about me. If you don't care about a person, you won't feel uncomfortable about these things. No, Jing Qing quickly said, afraid of being misunderstood. His face was still a little apprehensive. When he met Tang Gua's gaze, he was speechless for a moment. Tang Gua raised her eyebrows and asked, then why? Jing Qing, the Empress is so unreasonable. Could it be that she doesn't only show it in front of him? Is she treating him differently? How your majesty does things must have your majesty's own intentions. Jing Qing just understands, it's not that I don't care about your majesty. So, do you care about this emperor? Tang Gua asked, unwilling to let him go. What else could Jing Qing do? He could only bite the bullet and nod. He had to admit that he did like the Empress. This Empress, who was a few years younger than him, pretended to be mature in front of others, but revealed her true colors in front of him. Then I am very happy. Tang Gua picked up her teacup and took a sip of the flower tea. As expected, it's the imperial husband's flower tea. It's my favorite. System, that's because of the imperial husband. Jing Cheng's mouth also revealed a smile. The Empress was straightforward in front of him, how could he not like her? Actually, I don't have too many thoughts about Nan Yunchuan and Su Qing. Tang Gua put down her teacup and said indifferently, it's just that they always have various ways to appear in front of me. They clearly don't have me in their eyes, but they have to pretend to be affectionate. I'm just curious, what are they going to do? Jing Qing was shocked. Was the Empress confiding in him? I later found out that they especially like to leave the palace. I'll just let them out and see what they're up to. Jing Cheng's heart skipped a beat and he asked, did your majesty see it? Not yet, but we should be able to see it soon. Jing Qing took a deep breath. What do you need me to do, your majesty? You don't need to do anything, Tang Gua smiled, you just need to stay in the palace. If you want to go out of the palace to play, Jin will take you with me when Jin is free. Jingqing, Your Majesty, aren't you being a little too straightforward? I'm flattered. I want to take a nap. Before Jingqing could react, Tang Guo was already lying on top of him. He looked at the girl in his arms helplessly, his heart pounding. He did not intend to push her away. He was afraid that this position would be uncomfortable, so he even helped her move. Although he had thought about hugging the Empress many times in his mind, it was still very different when he actually interacted with her. Looking at her tightly shut eyes, Jingqing laughed silently and put his hands on her body. The Empress had already treated him like this, so of course he would not let her down. Tang Guo did not fall asleep, but was observing Su Qing and Nan Yunchuan. Chapter 895. As expected, the two of them met Tang Nuyu. Tang Nuyu knew that the two of them were coming to find her, so she deliberately didn't bring Xiao Jin and went out to play alone. When Su Qing and Nan Yunchuan saw Tang Nuyu, they created an opportunity and the three of them met by chance. Between the two of them, they were full of praise and appreciation for Tang Nuyu. Tang Nuyu's performance was no different from her previous life. The two of them quickly became familiar with Tang Nuyu. Later, Xiao Jin still found out about their plans. He didn't mind the two of them getting close to Tang Nuyu. Every time they came out, the place where the three of them gathered was always at Tang Nuyu's residence. They had been looking for opportunities to turn Tang Nuyu's husband, Dan Gu, and her husband, Yin Qiu, to their side. But every time, because of Tang Nuyu, something out of their control would happen. For example, whenever Dan Gu and Yin Qiu appeared, they would always look at them with disgust. They didn't mind. They only hoped that they could have more power on their side to coax Tang Nuyu together. However, every time the two of them made expressions of disgust towards them, they would be seen by Tang Nuyu. What? This king is not allowed to see the two of them. Tang Nuyu frowned. My husband, are you so intolerant of this king liking others? How can you be so jealous? How can you be worthy of being this king's husband? Dan Gu felt extremely wronged in his heart, and he was even more disgusted with Xiao Jin and the other two. He had become Tang Nuyu's husband a long time ago, so he didn't know that Su Qing and Nan Yunchuan were from the palace. He only thought that these two people wanted to climb up the ladder of riches and honor. He despised and hated them in his heart. These two people were known to Tang Nuyu outside. With Xiao Jin, who had a high status, their status was already in danger. They had to be on guard against two equally outstanding men. Forget about the king's husband, Yin Qiu, you're just a little servant. How dare you control this king? Yin Qiu's face was pale. He pursed his lips and knelt down. It's Yin Qiu's fault. Please forgive me, Your Highness. Tang Nuyu looked at Yin Qiu, who was so humble, and couldn't help but think of the Yin Qiu, who was so arrogant and kicked her on the night before she died. Yes, even if she died, she would be humiliated. It's good that you know your mistake. You have to remember your identity. You're just this prince's servant. Even if you're this prince's husband, you can't control this prince. If you, the moon, this king, the moon king, this king's mansion, this king, the moon, this moon's residence, if you, this king, this. These words really scared Yin Qiu. He had once been sent to the Moon King's residence as a gift. Once the Moon King didn't want him, he would end up in a miserable state. Your Highness, Yin Qiu won't dare to do it again. Shan Gu wanted to say something, but he suddenly remembered the whip from before. Even if the king was a fool at that time, they were not easy to bully. Looking at Yin Qiu, who was about to collapse on the ground, he quickly shut his mouth and stopped interrupting. After Shan Gu and Yin Qiu left, Tang Nuyu quickly revealed a little girl's attitude. At present, she, Su Qing, and Nan Yunchuan were innocent and only got along as friends. Therefore, she had to explain to the two of them. Su Qing, Yunchuan, don't misunderstand. They are too unreasonable. This king has made two friends, but you have to care. This king suspects that the empress really wants to harm this king like you said. These two people are very likely to be the empress's people. Chapter 896. As soon as she said this, Su Qing and Nan Yunchuan looked at each other. Even Xiao Jin felt a headache coming on. Sometimes, it was not that easy to plot against a fool. Who knew what this fool's brain was like? Now, they couldn't rope in Yin Qiu and Shan Gu because they had just told Tang Nuyu that the empress might harm her. Tang Nuyu now suspected that Yin Qiu and Shan Gu were the empress's people. Without evidence to prove their innocence, their involvement with the two of them would only make Tang Nuyu misunderstand. Just thinking about it gave them a headache. This time, they left the palace to make Tang Nuyu suspect that the empress would harm her. Of course, in order to make things go smoothly and make Tang Nuyu trust them wholeheartedly, they would arrange a lot of things so that Tang Nuyu would only trust them. But today, forget it. The few of them looked at each other. In the end, Su Qing and Nan Yunchuan said goodbye to Tang Nuyu and left. Tang Gua and the system both watched this scene. They were silent for a moment, and it was Tang Gua who asked, Tongzi, do you feel like you've seen this scene somewhere before? Now that the host said it, I also feel that it's very similar. Do you remember? I remember, the host, isn't this the prince's novel that we read in the early years? It's a very trashy prince's novel, but this time, it's a queen. Tang Gua nodded. She also remembered. This Tang Nuyu seemed to want to walk the path of a trashy prince. The two did not continue speaking because they saw that Tang Nuyu had actually gone to Shan Jiyi's room. Host, what is this Moon King planning to do? Tang Guo also shook her head. At first, she thought that Tang Nuyu was planning to take revenge with hatred. But later on, Tang Nuyu was actually able to endure and get along with these men peacefully. Not only did she get along peacefully, but she also did not reject their ambiguous relationship. He had married Xiao Jin and even shared a room with Xiao Jin. There seemed to be nothing to be dissatisfied with. She was just like a real princess who doted on her husband. Tang Nuyu knew the purpose of Su Qing and Nan Yunchuan's appearance, but she did not refuse and even followed the original script. She was very curious about what Tang Nuyu was going to do. Now, Tang Nuyu actually came to Dan Jiyi's room after the others left. It was really interesting. Wang Fu, I've made you suffer today. Shan Gu was indeed very sad. Her life was not good. A long time ago, she had been forced to marry the foolish prince of the West Saint Nation and had been mocked by many people. Recently, he had been extremely aggrieved. But what could he do? Tang Nuyu was the prince of West Saint Country, he couldn't resist. What are you talking about, Your Highness? You were right. Shan Gu shouldn't appear outside and disturb Your Highness. Tang Nuyu sighed and walked to Shan Jiyi's side. She tugged at his sleeve. Wang Fu. Shan Gu was a little shocked. What was the prince doing? Tang Nuyu looked aggrieved. This prince didn't want to treat you like that. This prince did this because I had no choice. Shan Gu was suspicious, but she wanted to hear Tang Nuyu's explanation. This prince suspects that they have other motives for approaching this prince. Shan Gu was shocked. Why does Your Highness think so? Tang Nuyu hurriedly pulled Shan Gu to sit down and told her about what happened to Su Qing and Nan Yunchuan. Shan Gu was actually a very smart man. When she heard Tang Nuyu's description, she felt that this matter was a bit coincidental. Chapter 897. They also told me that the Empress wanted to harm me. I don't even know who wants to harm me now. So, Your Highness. Tang Nuyu looked calm. I was just acting for them. I wanted them to think that I didn't trust anyone. Because of my bad relationship with you, I could only trust them in the end. Dan Ji's heart skipped a beat. Then what do you think is going on? Could they be sent by the Empress? If they were really sent by the Empress, do you think the Empress would make it so obvious? Dan Gu thought that he was right. If they were really sent by the Empress, how could they be discovered so easily by the prince? I suspect that they are here to sow discord between the Empress and me. It's a big conspiracy, Tang Nuyu said in a low voice. I also suspect something else. What is it? Dan Gu felt that perhaps Tang Nuyu was not that stupid. The reason why Tang Nuyu said this to Dan Gu was that Dan Gu was the least rebellious among these men. Dan Gu was born in an environment that made him a person who was content with the status quo. As long as he was given enough assurance, he would definitely choose the side that was most beneficial to him. Back then, it was because those men controlled her and schemed against the Empress that Dan Gu had no choice but to join them. Xiao Jin. I also suspect that he has other motives. This time, Dan Gu was really shocked. She said subconsciously, don't you like him, Your Highness? I do like him. Tang Nuyu looked very pained. But I always feel that his heart is not here, so I can't help but suspect that he used to be the sixth prince of the state of Qi. The men there are very noble. I think that he might not be willing to be a member of my harem. Your Highness is so good to him. What else does he want? Dan Gu said, vaguely feeling indignant for Tang Nuyu. Tang Nuyu smiled in her heart. If Dan Gu only listened to her in the future, she could let Dan Gu live a glorious life for the rest of her life. The prerequisite was that he was not allowed to betray her this time. Compared to me being nice to him, I'm afraid he'd prefer to go back to the kingdom of Qi to be the emperor. Tang Nuyu's face was filled with loneliness. If it was in her previous life, she would not have bothered to act. After being killed once, she had already learned these things. Sometimes, sincerity might not be exchanged for sincerity. Perhaps some hypocritical words could be exchanged for greater gains. She didn't know how to describe such a thing. She only knew that this was the only way she could live comfortably in this life and not be schemed to death. So, husband, can you understand me? Tang Nuyu held Dan Ji's hand and touched her face. There was a very shallow scar. This prince was stupid in the past and accidentally hurt you. Today, this prince had no choice but to put on an act and said harsh words. Prince, what are you doing? This prince only wants to tell you that you will always be this prince's husband. This prince is currently in a dangerous situation. If you are willing to stay by this prince's side, you will always be my husband. If you are unwilling, this prince can secretly send you out and let you live a free life. This was the first time Dan Gu had been treated so sincerely. She was a bit moved and thought of his own situation. Dan Gu doesn't have a free life. If Your Highness is willing, Dan Gu can always stand by Your Highness's side. Actually, she had thought a lot. Perhaps she could take a gamble. If she took a gamble, she would gain glory, splendor, wealth, and the prince's favor. If she lost, she could just go back to the past. At first, Jing Qing was a little surprised, but now he was used to it. This should be a sign that the Empress liked him. How could he refuse? Then Your Majesty has to come often, he said casually. Tang Guo burst out laughing, of course I have to come often. I sleep very well here. System, bullshit. The host sleeps very well everywhere. In any case, she has never seen her unable to sleep. When it came to coaxing men, she was really good at it. There was no repetition, and all of them fell on this guy. The next day, Su Qing and Nan Yunchuan both returned to the palace. Just like before, Nan Yunchuan often came to find Tang Guo, trying his best to show off. Chapter 899. On the other hand, Su Qing inadvertently revealed her talent and obtained Tang Guo's appreciation. For a time, the limelight of the two of them had overshadowed the imperial husband. Vaguely, there were many news of the imperial husband falling out of favor in the harem. They were all waiting for the imperial husband to be unable to sit still. In fact, most of the men in the harem hoped that the imperial husband could fight with the two of them, so that they could benefit from it. Unfortunately, Jing Qing did not do as they wished. He stayed in his room all day long, and it was said that he practiced martial arts and swordsmanship in the palace every day. Because of this, many servants secretly cursed, "What a waste of the position of the imperial husband. If you like to practice swordsmanship so much, why bother to be the imperial husband?" Tang Guo was invited to the pavilion in the imperial garden every day. While listening to Su Qing's zither music, she played chess with Nan Yunchuan. When the two of them sat opposite each other, Tang Guo would often raise her head and smile in a certain direction. Su Qing and Nan Yunchuan basically did not notice, and occasionally they would think that Tang Guo was smiling at them. However, the position Tang Guo was looking at was the roof opposite the pavilion. The imperial husband, who was supposed to be practicing swordsmanship in the palace, was squatting in a corner of the roof, revealing a pair of eyes to stare at her. If she saw it at the first moment, she would definitely smile at him. Jing Qing was also very depressed. He only secretly looked at what they were doing, but every time, he would be discovered by the Empress. Her Majesty would even smile at him, without any intention of blaming him. Her eyes were full of love and indulgence, making people's ears burn. How could this Empress not be liked? "Your Majesty, you have lost," Nan Yunchuan reminded. Tang Guo came back to her senses and found that she had indeed lost. "System, host, have you heard of beauty that misleads people?" "I lost," Tang Guo said to the chief steward beside her. "Go and get the white jade chess piece. Yunchuan is the most suitable for it." Nan Yunchuan was shocked. This white jade chess piece was His Majesty's beloved item. How could he give it away just like that? "Your Majesty, is this inappropriate?" "There's nothing inappropriate. Yunchuan is worthy." Nan Yunchuan's heart was still a little excited, especially when he saw Tang Guo looking at him with such indulgence. His heart was beating very fast. The Empress's treatment of him was getting better and better. Basically, she would agree to everything he wanted. If it wasn't for that, he would have given up. He would have given up on doing what he wanted. Yunchuan, Su Qing Su's, Su Qing's, Su. Fortunately, Su Qing reminded him. Otherwise, he would have already fallen into the Empress's gentleness. Tang Guo looked at Su Qing and said, "Some time ago, I got a guqin and gave it to the guqin master. I'll give it to Su Qing later." SS Qins, Su's of Qin of Su of Qin Qing. Su, of course of the of my, of course, of Su of Su. Of course of the of, I of. Alright, it's decided then. We still have other matters to attend to. The two of them watched Tang Guo leave with complicated feelings. They thought that Tang Guo was going back to deal with government affairs, but they didn't know that she had secretly gone to the imperial husband's palace. Jing Qing was already sitting in his seat waiting for her. He looked at her and said, "Your Majesty is so generous. You gave away both the qin and the white jade chess piece." He clearly knew that she had no thoughts about those two people, but he couldn't help but feel sour in his heart. He really wanted to press Her Majesty into his arms. "I am very generous," Tang Guo leaned in front of Jing Qing. There's another treasure that I didn't give away. How about I give it to you? What is it? Jing Qing was curious. Could it be another treasure sword? Tang Guo looked at him and knew what he was thinking. She leaned over and whispered in his ear, Shen. What? Jing Chang's eyes widened. What did His Majesty mean? Chapter 900. To be honest, Jing Chang's mind was in a mess. He had long known that the Empress was not serious in front of him and had a different side to her. In front of others, the Empress only had a few expressions. Under her serious face, it was impossible to guess the other party's thoughts. In front of him, the Empress's eyes were clear and bright. It was clear that the person she liked was him. Every time he was stared at by those eyes, his heart would burn with passion. He never thought that the other party would say such straightforward words. So, how should he respond to this sentence? How could he not seem too anxious, maintain his demeanor, and not let the Empress think that he was not enthusiastic enough? Imperial husband, why are you in a daze? Don't you like such a treasure? No, I like it very much. As soon as he heard Tang Guo's words, Jing Qing was a little anxious and did not hesitate to speak out his feelings. After speaking, his ears were hot. Seeing Tang Guo's smiling eyes, he sighed in his heart. The Empress was teasing him again. However, seeing her happy, he was also very happy. He looked straight into Tang Guo's eyes and said again, I like it very much. If Your Majesty is willing to give it to me, I am willing to cherish it with my life. If he had such an Empress as his companion for the rest of his life, he could forget about going to the battlefield and accompany the Empress in the palace. Your Majesty, you suspect that there is something wrong with Nan Yunchuan and Su Qing. Do you need me to do anything? Tang Guo ate a piece of cake and said, You don't have to do anything. You just have to be the Empress's husband. It's not a big deal, I will deal with it. But I want to know. Facing the serious Jing Qing, Tang Guo laughed. All right, then I will tell you. She leaned closer to Jing Qing and whispered, They want my life. What? Jing Qing suddenly stood up. His face was extremely serious, and there was a hint of anger. How dare they? If this was not the palace, he would have pulled out his sword and hacked the two people to death. Tang Guo raised her eyes and smiled, Why wouldn't I dare? Not only do they want my life, they also want to overthrow the entire West Saint Empire's rule, re-establish male dominance, and restore the status of men. She didn't ask Jing Qing what he thought of these things, but only expressed what those people wanted to do. Asking Jing Qing this question, wasn't it making things difficult for him? As a man, there was almost no one who didn't want to raise their status, even if they were rich and lived a good life. Who wouldn't be willing to raise their status without any risk? On the contrary, even in those countries where women had a low status, even if they had been oppressed and numb, no one would be unwilling to raise their status if there was no risk. She was not prepared to raise the status of the men of the West Saint Empire. At least when she was ruling, she didn't want to do much. For the West Saint Empire to be where it is today, it was the result of the hard work of the empresses of the West Saint Empire. Not to mention whether she wanted to change or not, if she really wanted to restore their status as equals, it would take a lot of effort. Once there was a change in class, the West Saint nation would definitely fall into chaos. She couldn't stay here for long. The original owner of the body still had a few more years to live. In addition, she could also extend it by 20 years. What could she change? She had no interest in changing it. There must be a reason. In the future, without her here, the West Saint Empire might continue to rule, or it might be overthrown by someone. Chapter 901. Of course, it could also develop into a country where men and women were equal. All of these required a certain amount of time. This wasn't a chaotic world, and she wasn't that bored. She also didn't want to be a wise ruler and establish great achievements. When a country was in turmoil, the people wouldn't be able to make a living. Many great achievements were built on the suffering of the people and the lives of tens of thousands of people. How could those people who died in the midst of great achievements be similar to a female supporting character like her, cannon fodder? She was just here for a trip, to fall in love, and to take revenge. System, here's a sigh. Host, you really understand. He liked this kind of host. That's right, treating every world as a trip. Fall in love, abuse scum, and a lifetime will pass. How comfortable. Imperial husband, don't think too much. They can't touch me. Tang Guo comforted Jing Qing. As for them, we already have a plan. Your Majesty doesn't plan to kill them. Jing Qing was surprised. According to Her Majesty's words, he could guess that the two weren't planning to kill them. We are also curious about how they plan to harm us and overthrow our West Holy Empire. Tang Guo smiled faintly. I also want to see if they will realize their mistakes and mend their ways after we treat them so well. If they realize their mistakes and mend their ways, Your Majesty will accept them again. Tang Guo found Jing Cheng's point of interest and shook her head. No, I can't tolerate betrayal. No matter if they realize their mistakes or mend their ways, it's impossible for them to return to the past. Jing Qing relaxed. That's good. It's good that Your Majesty understands. Don't put people who betrayed you in important positions. This kind of person, if you don't pay attention, it's normal for them to betray you a second time. Of course, when he said this, he had a lot of selfish motives. If Her Majesty still accepted those two, he wouldn't be able to have her for himself. That's right, that was what he was thinking now. He only wanted to have her for himself. When this kind of possessiveness was born, even he himself was shocked. But as he interacted with the Empress, this feeling grew stronger and stronger. Now, he didn't want to control it anymore. He held Tang Guo's hand on the table. Your Majesty, if there's anything difficult, let me do it. Okay. Tang Guo didn't refuse. Since Jingqing is trying his best to show off, I won't stand on ceremony. Being called by the Empress, Jingqing felt his heart burn. He subconsciously picked up her hand and kissed the back of it. After the kiss, even he felt that this action was a little out of line. However, his intuition told him that the Empress would not be angry. Instead, she would be happy. Sure enough, when he raised his head, he saw the Empress's smiling face. At that time, she had thought that it would be great if she could kiss His Majesty's cheek. I'll do something next. Don't take it to heart, Jing Qing. Tang Guo held Jing Cheng's hand. I'll be good to them. I want to see the result. Seeing her like this, Jing Cheng's heart ached a little. It was for her. She was the high and mighty Empress, but how many people below her were sincere to her? I know. He wanted to comfort her, but he didn't know what to say. He only said, I hope they can understand Your Majesty's kindness and don't do anything that they will regret. Even if the Empress couldn't dote on the men in the imperial harem, the Empress had always treated people fairly. All these years, no one had been wronged. After she talked things through with Jing Qing, Tang Guo didn't hide the fact that she valued Nan Yunchuan at all. Chapter 902. Even Su Qing was a little behind. The entire harem knew that the Empress's most favored servant was Nan Yunchuan, young Master Nan. It could be said that no one could compare to her. Ranked second was Su Qing, young Master Su. That imperial husband, who had an illustrious family background, was only ranked third. Host, several of your servants went to find trouble with Nan Yunchuan before, and have been instigated by Nan Yunchuan. Nan Yunchuan was instigating them, asking them to send a message to their families, wanting to cooperate with them from the inside. Under the surveillance of the system, it could be said that no one could escape Tang Guo's eyes. Nan Yunchuan being favored would definitely be an eyesore to many people. If it was an ordinary man, he would definitely fight with the other party and even show off his strength. But Nan Yunchuan was different. His purpose was different. The more people there were, the more confident he and Su Qing would be in winning these people over to their side. Host, what are you going to do? Repeat what happened yesterday to me. Under the system's repetition, Tang Guo understood the reason. It was nothing more than Li Shijun not used to Nan Yunchuan being favored. Relying on his family background, he wanted to show off his strength to Nan Yunchuan. Unexpectedly, after the confrontation, he did not gain any advantage. He thought that Nan Yunchuan would not let him go. He also did not expect that Nan Yunchuan would have such an idea in the end. In fact, the people chosen by Nan Yunchuan were very easy to be instigated. These people were all men who had been bullied by women when they were young. That kind of humiliation was especially deep, which was why they were persuaded by Nan Yunchuan. It could be said that before he entered the palace, he had basically figured out the people in the palace. They first wanted to get rid of the imperial husband, Jing Qing. The Jing family was also because the men of the Jing family grew up normally in the West Holy Empire and were rarely bullied. In the Jing family, the men's lives were also very good. Therefore, it was impossible to rope in the Jing family. There was no common goal, and the Jing family was also a royalist, so they could only be eliminated. This Li Shijun was different. His father was the legal wife, but because he was a man, he was laughed at by others. In the end, he became the Empress's servant, so his family did not dare to laugh at him and bully him. Now that Nan Yunchuan said this, his past grievances suddenly surfaced, and he naturally boarded Nan Yunchuan's pirate ship. After reading this, Tang Guo was silent for a moment before she called out, "Head Chief. Your Majesty, what are your orders?" Order Li Shijun to be banished to the cold palace. The chief steward was shocked. She could no longer understand the reason behind His Majesty's actions. She had been by His Majesty's side since she was young. Sure enough, ordinary people could not guess the thoughts of the emperor. Li Shijun has openly offended Yunchuan. I'm not happy. Tang Guo smiled faintly, and the head chief felt a chill run down his spine. He kept feeling that this was not the case, but everything here was decided by the Empress. Wait a minute. The chief steward hurriedly came back and saw Tang Guo walking to the side of the dragon table. She took out a piece of silk cloth and wrote a few words, "Give this to Lord Li secretly. He won't care about why Li Shijun is in the cold palace." Yes, Your Majesty. The system glanced at the words on the silk cloth. It was a very straightforward sentence, "Lord Li, I didn't know that Li Shijun had the idea of overthrowing the female rule of the West Saint Nation." The system trembled. Lord Li was a woman, and he especially enjoyed the feeling of a woman having supreme power. If he knew what Li Shijun did, he would probably want to slap him to death. Chapter 903. Tang Guo banished Li Shijun to the cold palace with the excuse of offending Nan Yunchuan. No one in the harem expected the Empress to do this. Even Nan Yunchuan himself did not expect this. Because of the previous incident with the silk cloth, Lord Li did not make a single splash. How could this be? Nan Yunchuan's mind was still a little muddled. Fortunately, he had spent half a day to persuade Li Shijun. In the end, the next day, Her Majesty banished Li Shijun to the cold palace because he had offended him. Su Qing frowned, but she couldn't think of a reason. They would not suspect that their purpose had been exposed. If it was really exposed, as the Empress, Tang Guo would definitely not tolerate their existence. At that time, not only would Li Shijun be banished to the cold palace, but they would also be banished to the cold palace. Therefore, it was not their purpose that was exposed. It could only be that the Empress really valued Nan Yunchuan to the bottom of her heart. Both Nan Yunchuan and Su Qing only thought of this point. Su Qing felt that it was very troublesome. Nan Yunchuan's heart was very complicated, and he felt a little sour. He was scheming against the Empress here, and he might take her life in the future. But because a servant had offended him, she banished him to the cold palace. People's hearts were made of flesh, and it would be a lie to say that he was not moved. In the end, he sighed. He could only say that their positions were different, and they could not work together. If he wanted to blame someone, he could only blame himself for wanting to overthrow the Empress's rule. She happened to be the Empress of this generation, and they were destined to be enemies. Yunchuan, wake up. Even if she banished Li Shijun to the cold palace for you because she cares about you, don't forget that she is the Empress. If she cares about you today, she can also banish you to the cold palace tomorrow. Only when we stand in the highest position of power and control our own fate is the best. Don't be moved by some gentleness. Nan Yunchuan nodded. I know, I have never thought of giving up our ideals. From the moment we took the first step, there was no way back, right? Su Qing's expression eased a little. You'd better not go to the Empress often recently. It's good to get her trust and love, but I'm afraid that it will be too popular and cause others to be hostile. Got it. Nan Yunchuan also planned to see the Empress less recently. He went to see her every day, and every day, he would be faced with the Empress's focused eyes, as well as her repeated orders for him. He was almost unable to take it anymore. Su Qing looked at Nan Yunchuan's appearance and sighed. Why don't you call yourself sick? Wake up your brain and let me do it recently. All right. Nan Yunchuan agreed without any hesitation. If this continued, he didn't even know if he would be distracted by the Empress's good intentions. Claiming to be sick was not a bad idea. Su Qing narrowed her eyes. I have a very good plan. You claim to be sick and let someone diagnose you with infectious symptoms. It's best if you can be isolated for treatment. This way, you will have a chance to leave the palace and go to Tang Nuyu. Nan Yunchuan thought of Tang Nuyu's infatuated face and was a little unwilling. However, for the sake of their ultimate goal, they still agreed. On the other side, Tang Guo's expression was unclear when she heard their plan. I find it strange. Your Majesty, what are you curious about? Jing Qing asked in confusion. Tang Guo held her chin and placed a piece before saying, no matter how good I am to them, they will choose to betray me. They clearly know the price of betraying me, but they still want to do it. Their hearts are moved, but they will still make such a choice. Do you think they will regret it? Would they? Nan Yunchuan, Su Qing, would these two people regret their decision today? Chapter 904. They will. Jing Qing said. After placing his piece, he held Tang Guo's hand. One day, they will remember His Majesty's kindness and know what they have missed. Jing Qing, if they knew what they would lose in the future, would they still make such a choice? This question stumped Jing Qing. He shook his head and said, I don't know about that, because I won't make the wrong choice. I like His Majesty, and His Majesty likes me. I can see that His Majesty treats me well, and I also want to be with His Majesty. You know how to talk. Tang Guo's mood improved. Forget it, let's not care about them. If they don't want the chance, then don't blame me. She had given each of them a chance. It wasn't that it couldn't be salvaged, it was that they didn't want it. She would not be soft-hearted to those who wanted to harm her. In less than 2 days, Nan Yunchuan indeed claimed to be sick. No one knew what tricks the two of them had used, but they were actually diagnosed by the imperial physician as having an infectious disease and needed to be isolated for treatment. In order not to endanger the imperial palace and the empress's health, the imperial physician suggested that they be sent out of the palace to recuperate. Tang Gui didn't agree at first. Of course, she did it on purpose. She still had to hesitate for a while. In the end, she agreed to the request of the entire court. Everyone knew how much the empress cared about Nan Yunchuan. For him, she had almost put herself in danger. Just like that, Nan Yunchuan was still sent out of the palace to recuperate. As for when he would recover, the imperial physician did not give a definite message. In the past few days, Tang Gui had to pretend to be unhappy and depressed. Occasionally, she would go to the imperial garden for a stroll. It was inevitable that Su Qing's zither would be able to help her relieve her boredom. Su Qing looked at the silent empress in front of her and occasionally looked at him. She sneered in her heart. Look, Nan Yunchuan, this is the empress. Even if you leave, there are still thousands of people who can take your place. If you die, the empress may only be sad for a short while and won't do anything because of you. So, what's the use of pampering? Power was the most important. Su Qing plays the zither very well. Su Qing replied, as long as His Majesty likes it. However, Su Qing's hand seems to be injured. It's better not to play. Only then did Su realize that because he was thinking about things and did not notice that his hand was cut. Call for the imperial physician. It's just a small wound, Your Majesty. There's no need to trouble the imperial physician. That won't do. Tang Gui insisted on calling the imperial physician. She frowned and said, if Su Qing also has some disease like Yunchuan, then I will be very sad. Su Qing was startled. So the empress hadn't forgotten about the southern cloud river. In the past, you were familiar with Yunchuan. I could only vaguely feel Yunchuan's existence when I came to you. I wonder how he is now. Su Qing looked at the empress who was immersed in her memories and felt a little uncomfortable. He knew this wasn't a good feeling, but being treated as Nan Yunchuan's substitute by the empress, this feeling was even worse. He and Nan Yunchuan were equally matched. He had never thought that the reason why the empress listened to his zither for half a month was because of Nan Yunchuan. Tang Gui felt Su Qing's thoughts and laughed in her heart. She knew the thoughts of these men the best. Su Qing, you must take care of your body. Don't make me worry. Such words of concern were different in Su Qing's ears. The empress was clearly afraid that he would be the same as Nan Yunchuan. If he was also sick, she would have no place to miss Nan Yunchuan. Chapter 905. Your Majesty cares so much about Su Qing, is it because of Yunchuan? Su Qing finally confirmed that when the empress looked at him, it was as if she was looking at another person through him. He shouldn't care who the empress liked, but the feeling of being used as a substitute made him feel especially uncomfortable. After blurting out this sentence, he regretted it in his heart. It was really inappropriate to ask such a stupid question in front of the empress. If he angered the empress, all his previous efforts would have been in vain. Your Majesty, please forgive me. Su Qing shouldn't have asked about this. Tang Gui came back to her senses. Do you think I'm looking at Yunchuan through you? Isn't it? Su Qing asked subconsciously. Tang Gui shook her head. It's easy for me to think of Yunchuan here, but I'm very clear about the two of you. Your temperaments are also different. Yunchuan is active and lively. He likes to laugh and say funny things to please me. With him around, I'm in a good mood all day. No matter how many troubles I have, when I hear his voice, they will all disappear. She wasn't lying. This was how the original owner felt about Nan Yunchuan. At the age of 10, she ascended the throne and became the empress. Every day in the imperial court, no matter how mature she was still a young girl. After so many years of tension, how could she not like a person like Nan Yunchuan who suddenly appeared? She liked Nan Yunchuan very much. It wasn't the love between men and women, but Nan Yunchuan always had a way to make her feel good. The depression she encountered in the imperial court would dissipate after facing Nan Yunchuan. It was also because of Nan Yunchuan that she would occasionally smile, even if it was shallow. Even if she couldn't reveal too many thoughts to Nan Yunchuan, she still liked to stay with him. In the original owner's memory, there was a sentence to describe her impression of Nan Yunchuan. A pair of bright eyes, a lazy voice with a smile, sounded relaxed and comfortable. Su Qing was stunned by Tang Guo's words. So in the Empress's heart, Nan Yunchuan's image was like this? He was a little curious about what impression he had left in the Empress's heart. And Su Qing, you give me the feeling that you are always immersed in your own world. You are different from Yunchuan. He brings me laughter, while you bring me tranquility. Listening to the sound of your zither makes me feel very peaceful, and it is also a rare peace. This was also the feeling of the original owner. The reason why she was good to these two people was not without reason. Perhaps they were working too hard, or perhaps the Empress was truly too tired. The sudden appearance of these two different people naturally left a deep impression on her. In front of them, it was inevitable that he would let his guard down. I have to face all kinds of problems every day. Chapter 906. No, I still have work to do. Tang Guo refused. It was almost time for dinner. She had to accompany her husband for dinner. I'll come back tomorrow. When Tang Guo was about to turn around, she thought of something. By the way, the next time you leave the palace, Su Qing, help me see how Yunchuan is doing. You have the best relationship in the palace. You should go see him, right? Su Qing's heart was complicated, but she replied calmly. Yes, Su Qing will go. After visiting Yunchuan, Su Qing will immediately come back to report to Your Majesty. Your Majesty, don't worry. Yunchuan will definitely be fine. That's good. Su Qing watched as the Empress left in a hurry. Her heart was filled with complicated feelings that she could not get rid of. He looked at his cherished Guqin and then looked at all the things at hand. Which one of them was not given to him by the Empress? Unknowingly, the items given to him by the Empress had occupied his palace. He shook his head and put away his complicated gaze. Perhaps when Yunchuan came back, he would have to be sick for a while. Anyone who was treated like this by the Empress would gradually lose their heart. Even he was not sure. He would always have a heart of stone and would not be moved. But now, he was wavering, wasn't he? Host, Su Qing was also wavering. He is wavering, but he still won't change his mind. He will only think that this is human nature, and he will think of a way to overcome this problem. Su Qing is more rational than Nan Yunchuan. He always knows what he wants. In the past, he did succeed. His success point is that his heart is hard enough. For the sake of his goal, it can be said that he will do anything. It should be said that this group of men all have a common characteristic. Their hearts are hard. In order to achieve their goals, they can sacrifice their dignity and appearance. It had to be said that such a person could easily achieve great things. Unless there was an outsider like her, who had to be countless times stronger than them, it would not be easy to be schemed against. She was familiar with everything in the plot. With her countless experience, she was not afraid and worried about what these people would do. If there was no her, there would only be a reborn Tang Nuyu. She might not be a match for the other party. She might even repeat the same mistake. Tang Guo's lips curled up. She first returned to her own palace and then secretly went to Jing Chang's palace. The head chief was already used to the Empress's style and did not mind at all. He did not follow her, but stood guard outside the Empress's palace, pretending that she was inside. Where did you go to Su Qing again? Jing Cheng and Tang Guo were becoming more and more familiar with each other. After interacting with her for a long time, he subconsciously didn't treat her as a high and mighty empress when they were alone. It was like two people who were very close to each other. When they got along, it was really very comfortable. Your Majesty, how much longer? Jing Qing asked. Tang Guo grinned. Can't wait any longer. I just hope that your Majesty can relax a little and not waste your energy on some ungrateful people. It's no trouble at all. Just treat it as fun. Soon. Tang Guo picked up some food for Jing Qing. It will be over soon. When the time comes, I will dismiss the harem. How about you alone? Jing Cheng's heart skipped a beat, and he quickly said, Is your Majesty joking? Although he did want to have the Empress alone, could this harem be dismissed just like that? Jing Qing, you don't believe me. I believe your Majesty, but I don't want to make things difficult for your Majesty. Chapter 907. Tang Guo was amused and couldn't help but touch his face. It's so cute. I don't like them, so why should I keep them in the palace to waste their time? If your Majesty lets them out, will they really be able to find a good home? Jing Qing couldn't help but ask. It might be even harder than in the palace. Tang Guo was stunned for a moment, then smiled and said, Then what do you think? This question was thrown back, and Jing Qing was stumped. That's right, if he didn't let them out and stayed in the palace, what should they do? He thought that if he monopolized the Empress, those men in the palace might be able to have a good ending. Then he was annoyed. Was he asking for too much? It was already these people's fortune to meet such an Empress. Jing Qing is thinking too much. Jing Qing smiled in relief. If your Majesty is willing to let them out of the palace, it's also their fortune. He wouldn't lie and let them stay. He wanted to have the Empress by himself, which was an idea he had a long time ago. Tang Guo saw through Jing Cheng's thoughts and didn't expose him. Those men in the harem were pitiful and not pitiful. They all came for a purpose. She didn't sympathize with them, nor would she treat them unfairly. Of course, the premise was that they didn't betray her. While Nan Yunchuan was recuperating in the palace, Tang Guo went to Su Qing's place every day to listen to the zither. The trend of the harem had begun to change again. As for Nan Yunchuan, he didn't recuperate outside the palace. Instead, he took advantage of this time to contact Tang Nuyu. With his glib tongue, he was able to coax Tang Nuyu into running around in circles. At this time, Tang Nuyu was trapped between Xiao Jin and Nan Yunchuan. Of course, this was a little conflict. After all, she already had Xiao Jin, and now there was another Nan Yunchuan. According to her initial temperament, she definitely wouldn't immediately do anything with Nan Yunchuan. But how could two people who liked each other not let Xiao Jin see something? Just like that, the three of them each had their own thoughts and acted out a show of deep affection. Tang Guo watched Tang Nuyu with great interest every day, especially when her acting skills were getting better and better. If she had not watched the whole process, she would have thought that Tang Nuyu was just a naive and sweet girl. I have to say, when a person is bullied, their potential is limitless. Tang Guo stood up with a smile on her face. I should also go and see Yunchuan, whom I miss every day. System, shivering in the corner, he glanced outside the palace again, at Nan Yunchuan's courtyard. Tang Nuyu and Nan Yunchuan were fighting fiercely. What was the host planning to do? Could it be that he was planning to crash into that Azura field? What should he do? He was still looking forward to it. Head steward, Pick some things that Yunchuan likes for me and bring more supplements. I suddenly want to go out of the palace to see how he is. The chief steward's mouth twitched. She finally understood a little of His Majesty's thoughts. In her heart, she actually liked the imperial husband. On the surface, she was most affectionate with Nan Yunchuan. But she still didn't understand why His Majesty would have two sides. What was the purpose of doing all this? Of course, since His Majesty had ordered, she would definitely do as he asked. Even if she knew that he didn't like Nan Yunchuan, she would still do her best to pick out the things that Nan Yunchuan liked, and they had to be of the highest quality. His Majesty didn't like Nan Yunchuan, but he didn't verbally admit it, did he? So the people under them just had to do as they were told. Don't get violent over him. You want to kill your own sister. Tang Nuyu was about to cry. The one who wanted to cry even more was Nan Yunchuan, especially when he saw the Empress, who would usually smile at him, return to her usual indifferent and distant expression. His heart ached. He wasn't even sure, but in that instant, it seemed as if something had slipped away. He wanted to grab hold of it, but he couldn't. He opened his mouth, wanting to explain something, but he couldn't explain what had just happened. At this time, he and Tang Nuyu were still hugging each other. Thinking of this, he quickly let go of Tang Nuyu. Tang Nuyu also quickly jumped up. She wanted to explain something, but like Nan Yunchuan, she didn't know how to explain. Chapter 909. If she had known earlier, she would have used other methods. Why did she have to take such a risk? Because of a stinky man, the two sisters would become enemies. Greetings, Your Majesty. The two reacted and hurriedly saluted. Nan Yunchuan knelt on the ground with his head lowered. He didn't dare to look at the Empress in front of him. He didn't expect that one day, the Empress would see such a scene. What was even more unexpected was that after being caught in such a scene, he didn't think about whether he would be sentenced to death by the Empress. Instead, his mind was full of how to explain to prove his innocence. However, what happened between him and Tang Nuyu just now couldn't be explained at all. The more he tried to explain, the more it felt like he was quibbling, so he just knelt on the ground and didn't say a word. Tang Nuyu also had a headache. The Empress didn't get angry, which made her more afraid than getting angry. She didn't want history to repeat itself. She didn't want to fall out with her Empress sister for a stinky man. You don't even want to explain. When Tang Nuyu heard this, her heart relaxed. These words were not said to her. It seemed that the fire didn't necessarily burn on her head. You have been sick for a long time. I was very worried. I deliberately put down my official affairs and went out of the palace to see you. I didn't expect to see such a scene. Head steward, even the Empress looks serious when she's lying. I thought you were seriously ill, Tang Guo said with an indifferent face, but her eyes were sad. Seeing you today, I'm afraid you are not sick. Nan Yunchuan quickly raised his head. As soon as the two words, Your Majesty, came out, he didn't know how to continue. Could he say that he was actually sick, but recovered quickly? How could Her Majesty the Empress believe such a clumsy excuse? The more he explained, the more disgusted she would be with him. Yes, at this time, he was not afraid of death. He was only afraid that she would look at him with disgust. So, you said you were sick and went out of the palace to see her. Tang Guo suddenly understood, which made Nan Yunchuan panic. No, how could it be because of Tang Nuyu, this stupid woman? Her Majesty was so good. How could he abandon Her Majesty and like Tang Nuyu? Tang Nuyu, why do I feel that something is wrong? Does the Empress mean that she won't kill them? She secretly glanced at the Empress's sad expression at this moment. Even Tang Nuyu felt pity for the Empress. The Empress's sad voice sounded, which made Tang Nuyu's eyes widen. Wait, little sister. Isn't this a bit wrong? Nan Yunchuan was also a bit confused. But when he saw the Empress's indifferent expression and her disappointed and sad eyes, his heart also twitched. He wanted to say something, but Tang Guo spoke first. From today onwards, Nan Yunchuan will no longer be in my harem. He died suddenly because of illness. Nan Yunchuan, Moon King. Since you two like each other, I will make the decision today. You can take him into your residence. Tang Niu. Nan Yunchuan's heart sank, and his face became pale. He looked at Tang Guo. She only looked at him, and that look was full of disappointment. Tang Nuyu pursed her lips and said with a sobbing tone, "What's the matter? Let's go back to the mansion first, okay?" "No, I'm not going." If he went, he would be one of the Moon King's men. He was not going. He wanted to stay here. This was the courtyard that His Majesty had bought for him. Even if he were to die, he would not leave this place. At this time, Nan Yunchuan had completely forgotten his purpose, which was to overthrow the Empress's rule. His mind was only filled with the fact that he had lost Her Majesty, the Empress who was sincere to him. He had lost her. Nan Yunchuan finally couldn't hold it in anymore. He slammed his fists on the ground and cried silently. Chapter 9-11. Nan Yunchuan was unwilling to leave the courtyard that Her Majesty the Empress bought for him to recuperate. He thought that if he stayed here, even if he couldn't see Her Majesty the Empress, he could still spend the rest of his time reminiscing. Tang Nuyu came several times. Later, she found that Nan Yunchuan seemed to have lost his fighting spirit. She also lost interest. In her previous life, this man was not so emotional. Everything he did was cruel and merciless. He schemed against the Empress, deceived her with sweet words, and personally led the soldiers to surround Her Majesty the Empress's palace. The young Empress was unwilling to become a captive, nor was she willing to show weakness in front of them. She was even more unwilling to be held hostage by them to admit her mistakes and boost their morale. In front of all of them, the 18-year-old Empress pulled out her sword and committed suicide. Before dying, the young Empress only said one sentence, "I'm sorry, Mother Empress." Even if Tang Nuyu was reborn, she still couldn't understand what the Empress's last sentence meant. If it were her, she wouldn't have the courage of the Empress to cut her own neck with a knife. At that time, Nan Yunchuan watched the Empress commit suicide without blinking. She looked at the dazed Nan Yunchuan, who was wiping the things that the Empress gave him over and over again, and her heart was filled with doubts. They were clearly the same person, but why was there such a big difference? What had changed in the middle that caused Nan Yunchuan to be unable to recover after losing the Empress? "What's the use of you doing this?" Tang Nuyu squatted down. "I thought you liked me. I didn't expect you to like Her Majesty the Empress. Then why did you come to approach me? Isn't it good for you to stay by the Empress's side?" Nan Yunchuan raised his head in a daze and looked at Tang Nuyu. "Yes, why did I provoke you? Why didn't I stay by the Empress's side? Why did I do all of this and completely lose her? So, why is that? Why?" Nan Yunchuan was stunned for a moment, then suddenly laughed wildly. Tears came out of his eyes. Why? It's ridiculous. Why? It was to restore the dignity of men, so that the men of the West Holy Empire, like the men of other countries, would stand at the top and become the ruler of the West Holy Empire. In conclusion, there was only one word to describe it: power. You really don't want to return to the residence with me? Tang Nuyu held her cheeks and said. The Empress has already given the order. You are now a member of the Moon King's residence. I'm not leaving. Nan Yunchuan said in a low voice as he continued to wipe the white jade chessboard in his hand. This was the Empress' most treasured possession, yet she had given it to him without any hesitation. He clearly knew that the Empress was treating him better and better. At that time, he only had thoughts of using power to overthrow the rule of the West Holy Empire. If he had calmed down, would things have turned out this way? When Su Qing heard the news of Nan Yunchuan's death, she could not believe it. He did not leave the palace and did not know the situation outside the palace. Because Nan Yunchuan was very important, he had no choice but to use his own spies to investigate what was going on. When he found out the truth, it was even more unacceptable than Nan Yunchuan's death. The Empress bumped into Nan Yunchuan and Tang Nuyu being intimate, and even announced his death on the spot. However, because she cared too much about him and could not bear for him to die, and because Tang Nuyu was her biological sister, she actually gave Nan Yunchuan to Tang Nuyu. Su Qing frowned. Nan Yunchuan was finally crippled. Chapter 9:12. No matter what the other party did, he could no longer gain the Empress's trust. He decided that in a few days, while he was out of the palace, he would personally visit Nan Yunchuan. Your Majesty, are you not sad? Jing Qing knew about these things, but he never thought that Nan Yunchuan would actually hook up with Tang Nuyu. With his brain, it was not difficult to guess what Nan Yunchuan wanted to do. Hooking up with Tang Nuyu was definitely not purely because he liked Tang Nuyu, but because he wanted to use Tang Nuyu's identity. Using Tang Nuyu to deal with the Empress was just a fight between two sisters. If it was a man who directly went against the Empress, then the world would not go against him. Everyone could understand that the former was easier and more justifiable, especially for a woman like Tang Nuyu who didn't seem to be very smart. But, was it really not working? Jing Qing narrowed his eyes. He always felt that this Tang Nuyu was a bit strange. She looked like a simple and ignorant person, but in reality, it still needed to be investigated. What are you sad about? Tang Gui didn't seem to mind and ate her food. These things have long been expected. Jing Qing hesitated for a moment and asked, then, was your Majesty sincere to Nan Yunchuan from the beginning? Or did you just want to use his kindness to see what choice he would make in the end? Imperial husband, you may not understand, but I am sincere to everyone. As for what choice the other party makes, that's just a matter of convenience. Your Majesty has cared about Nan Yunchuan. Tang Gui understood the meaning behind his words. So Imperial husband cares about this? Naturally. Jing Qing didn't hide it at all. Your Majesty is too attractive. Jing Qing can't help but care. You promised that you can only be mine in the future. I have to pay attention to you at all times and can't change your mind. I don't have feelings for Nan Yunchuan, so Jing Qing can rest assured. I said that I will only be good to you, so I know that I will only be good to you. Facing this kind of cute guy, Tang Gui was still very patient. Do you believe it? I believe whatever your Majesty says. System, this is awareness. Chasing a wife must be so shameless to succeed. Both of them were in a good mood. What does your Majesty plan to do next? Jing Qing asked because there was still Su Qing in the palace. Su Qing was a little different from Nan Yunchuan. She seemed to be a sentimental person, but in fact, Su Qing's heart was very hard. Let's see what he's going to do. Tang Gui smiled. No matter what the result is, it's their own choice. What do you think, Jingqing? Yes, Jingqing replied. Wasn't that right? If Nan Yunchuan didn't want to overthrow the Empress's rule, there wouldn't be such a result. The news he received was that after that incident, Nan Yunchuan was unable to recover from the setback. Every day, he would hide in that courtyard, foolishly fiddling with the items that the Empress gave him. So, why bother? As for Su Qing, he believed that in front of such an outstanding Empress, no matter how hard her heart was, she would still be moved. When the Empress said that she was good to a person, she meant it from the bottom of her heart. No matter who it was impossible for them not to be moved by sincerity. They only cared about quantity and quantity. Within 2 days, Su Qing left the palace. He first returned home, and then secretly went to Nan Yunchuan's courtyard. After entering, he saw Nan Yunchuan sitting in a sorry state in the middle of a pile of rare items, stroking those things over and over again. Brother Yunchuan. Su Qing went up and grabbed Nan Yunchuan's collar. Her cold voice sounded, "Have you forgotten what we want to do?" Chapter 9:13. Brother Yunchuan, have you forgotten that you were born inferior to women? Have you forgotten that you were mocked by those women? Have you forgotten that because you are a man, you had to be sent to the palace? Have you forgotten the grievance in your heart? Brother Yunchuan, wake up. The Empress is heartless to begin with. Now, she is just revealing her true colors ahead of time. Even if there was no previous incident, she would have abandoned you sooner or later. Nan Yunchuan was still unmoved. He stroked a piece of beautiful jade in his hand. This was given to him by Her Majesty on his birthday. Seeing this, Su Qing snatched the beautiful jade into her hands. Nan Yunchuan only felt that his hands were empty, and his dull gaze finally recovered. Su Qing was delighted, Brother Yunchuan. Again. Give me back the jade. This was a birthday gift from Her Majesty. It was his 18th birthday gift. Nan Yunchuan, please wake up. Su Qing looked at the jade in her hand and was angry. She raised her hand and was about to throw the jade away. Nan Yunchuan directly pounced on her. He grabbed Su Qing's wrist and was about to snatch the jade. Su Qing pinched the jade hard. Seeing this, Nan Yunchuan directly bit her wrist. Su Qing was in so much pain that she had no choice but to let go. Nan Yunchuan snatched the jade in his hand and smiled blankly. He held the jade in his hand as if he had obtained a treasure. He kissed it and touched it on his face. He said very softly, "I won't let you be snatched away." He had lost Her Majesty and could not lose it again. Every item that Her Majesty gave him, he would keep it well and treasure it. He would never allow anyone to hurt it. Nan Yunchuan, you. Su Qing could not believe it. Looking at the wound on her wrist, she felt that Nan Yunchuan had gone crazy. For a dead object, she actually bit his wrist crazily and did not let go. If he really did not let go, the other party would probably bite off his wrist. Do you know what you are doing? Nan Yunchuan thought of Su Qing's behavior just now and his expression turned cold. Get out. What did you say? Su Qing suspected that she had heard wrongly and had to ask again. She still heard Nan Yunchuan say, "Get out, I told you to get out. You are not allowed to take another step in here. You're telling me to scram just for an empress?" Nan Yunchuan looked at Su Qing indifferently. You don't deserve to mention her. After a pause, his eyes dimmed. I don't deserve to mention her either. We don't deserve to talk about her, and we don't deserve to be with her. You're crazy. You're crazy. You actually like her. You're forgetting your dreams for her. I'm crazy. Only now do I understand how meaningless it is to live without her in my life. Only after losing her did I realize that there was actually someone who treated me so well in this world. Su Qing's face was gloomy. In the end, she only glanced at Nan Yunchuan, who was immersed in those objects, and left. She was just an empress. What was so good about her? He did not believe that Nan Yunchuan would be so infatuated just because the empress was good. Without Nan Yunchuan, he would do it himself. Xiao Jin was also working together with him. It couldn't be that Xiao Jin had been bewitched by the empress, right? Even if it would be more difficult in the future, he would be able to overthrow the empress's rule with his own ability. After that day, Su Qing often appeared by the empress's side and became a popular person by the empress's side. Because of Nan Yunchuan's example, he always guarded his heart. Every moment, he would remind himself not to follow in Nan Yunchuan's footsteps. He would definitely be able to obtain the empress's heart while guarding his own heart. Chapter 9:14. He was different from Nan Yunchuan. He had truly lived under the oppression of women since he was young. So he would never be willing to be ruled by a woman. He reminded himself every day that he must not fall into the trap of the empress's gentleness. He thought that he was very successful. At least half a year had passed. He was the empress's favorite, but he had kept his heart and did not fall into it like Nan Yunchuan. And he would not be like Nan Yunchuan, crazy because of the empress. He, Su Qing, would never be able to become a person like Nan Yunchuan. He wanted to overthrow the empress's rule, stand at the top of the world, and regain the dignity of a man. He tried to curry favor with the empress, trying to gain her sincerity and trust, while secretly dealing with Tang Nuyu. After learning a lesson from Nan Yunchuan, he would never let the empress see such a scene. He was very careful with every step, and his calculations were perfect. He put on a disguise that no one, not even himself, could recognize. He thought it was very successful. One day, he suddenly realized that the empress was distracted while listening to his zither. The smile in the empress's eyes was definitely not because of him. It was definitely not because of him. Was it because of Nan Yunchuan? He did not miss this and broke one of the strings at that time. Su Qing. Tangguo came back to her senses and looked at Su Qing's bleeding finger. She quickly said, "Call the imperial physician." She looked at Su Qing with some blame. "How can you be so careless? Don't play the zither in the future. If Su Qing doesn't play the zither, your majesty won't have any zither to listen to. As long as your majesty likes it, Su Qing is willing to do anything." He lied to the empress. Tangguo said, "If you hurt your hand every time because of listening to the zither, it's better not to listen. The zither is not as important as you." Su Qing was stunned. He didn't know what to say about the excuse he had made up. He looked at his finger, which was wrapped in a handkerchief by the empress to stop the bleeding. He didn't know what to say. "Don't touch the zither for the next few months." Tangguo said to the chief steward, "Take away Su Qing's zither for me. When he recovers, return the zither to him." After saying that, she asked Su Qing, "Do you have anything else you like? I'll have someone find it for you." "No." Su Qing replied and allowed the imperial physician to help him open the red handkerchief, apply medicine, and bandage it. He stared at the handkerchief that was thrown to the side, somewhat lost in thought. But he quickly reacted, and the ripples in his eyes returned to calmness. He, Su Qing, would never succumb to the empress's gentleness. He lowered his head. He couldn't continue like this. He had to think of a way to take things one step further. In fact, he was a little scared. He would never become someone like Nan Yunchuan. He had to make the Empress trust him completely as soon as possible. It seemed that he could only take the risk. Your Majesty, is what you said just now true? Whatever Su Qing wants, you will give it to her. Tang Guo was a little surprised, but then she nodded. Of course. Su Qing wants to go out of the palace with your Majesty, is that okay? Every time, Su Qing went out alone and never went out with his Majesty. Su Qing lowered her eyes. He would arrange it well. A good show was waiting for their Empress. System, TSK, a good show is coming. Tang Guo stared at Su Qing and said. Okay, when do you want to go out? Is it up to me? Yes. Su Qing seemed a little happy. 3 days later, is that okay? Chapter 9:15. Tomorrow, I'm going to take Su Qing out to play. As usual, Jing Qing walked back after practicing his swordsmanship and heard Tang Guo say this. Now, he still practiced his swordsmanship at the same time every day. The difference was that when he practiced his swordsmanship in the past, the only people who waited and watched were the palace servants who served him. Now, as long as His Majesty was free, he would sneak here to watch him practice his swordsmanship. In the past, he did not prepare any flower tea in the palace. Now, he had all kinds of flower tea in the palace. In the past, he practiced his swordsmanship because he liked it. When he practiced his swordsmanship, he felt extremely carefree. If there was no sword, it would be boring in this cold palace. Now, other than what he liked, there was also a very important person to him who would watch from the side. His Majesty would smile and say to him, "The way you dance with your sword is so handsome." Because of her words, his sword moves went from simple to complicated. Not only did each move have to be practical, they also had to look good. Every time he turned his head, he would be able to meet that pair of especially bright eyes, which only reflected his shadow. Your Majesty, are you afraid that I will misunderstand something by telling me this? Jing Qing handed the sword to the palace servant. He did not return to his seat. Instead, he stood in front of her and bowed slightly. He looked at her seriously. The distance between the two was very close. Tang Guo also looked straight at him and smiled. Yes. Got it. Jing Chang's eyes were full of smiles. He raised his hand and pinched Tang Guo's chin. He said in a low voice, "Of course I believe in your Majesty, but the first person to accompany your Majesty out of the palace is not me. I am still very regretful. So, what does Imperial Husband want?" Like this, before Tang Guo could react, her lips were covered by 2 pieces of warmth. She looked at him with a hint of surprise in her eyes. She was not surprised, nor did she panic. On the other hand, the palace servants standing around quickly lowered their heads. They all thought to themselves, "Oh my God, the Imperial Husband is really bold. He actually dared to pinch the Empress's chin and kiss her mouth." The chief steward was shaking like a sieve. So this was the type that His Majesty liked. She was sure that His Majesty was not angry at all. Instead, he liked His Majesty's actions. "Your Majesty, you should close your eyes at this time." Jing Qing opened his eyes and found that His Majesty was looking at him. His ears turned red. However, he did not intend to let her go just like that. Her Majesty's taste was even sweeter than he had imagined. As he wished, Tang Guo hooked her arms around his neck. "All right, I'll do as you say. I'll close my eyes now." "Head Chief, Is it too late to leave now? She really didn't hear anything. Her husband was bold, and Her Majesty really indulged him. There was no doubt that the imperial husband was Her Majesty's favorite. System, I'm used to it. Boring, boring. Blocked, blocked. Suddenly, he felt that it was a little lonely to be single. After a long time, Jingqing let go of Tanghua. He even said regretfully, His Majesty will only reach adulthood in a few months. Otherwise, he could do more. Right now, he was very eager to completely possess His Majesty. System, TSK, TSK, TSK. Don't worry, a few months will pass quickly. Tanghua pushed Jingqing away and touched his back. She felt that it was a little wet. Go take a bath first and change your clothes. You'll catch a cold if you stay here for too long. Okay, I'll go now. Wait for me, Your Majesty. The next day, according to the agreement with Su Qing, Tanghua took Su Qing out of the palace to play after the court was dismissed. Chapter 9:16. Other than the chief steward, Tanghua brought 4 people with her. These 4 people were all experts among experts. The 2 of them pretended to be ordinary people and rode in a carriage together. Su Qing's eyes changed from the melancholy in the palace to a smile. It seems that you've really been stifled. Tanghua said with a smile. Su Qing hurriedly said, No, there's Your Majesty in the palace. How could I be stifled? It's only because Your Majesty accompanied Su Qing out of the palace this time that Su Qing was even happier. Then when I'm free in the future, I'll accompany you out to play. How about it? Tanghua had a faint smile on her lips, and the gentleness in her eyes made Su Qing stunned. He was sure that the Empress was not lying to him. She was really telling him that when she was free in the future, she would bring him out to play. Thinking of today's purpose, he hurriedly dispelled the strange and complicated feeling in his heart. Su Qing can't ask for anything more. It's Su Qing's fortune to be able to get such a promise from Your Majesty. You like the zither, like painting, and you should also like the beautiful scenery outside the palace. In the future, I'll accompany you to travel the world, see the beautiful scenery, and taste the delicious food. How about it? Su Qing was stunned. Of course it's good to have Your Majesty accompany me. How could he travel the world with her, see the beautiful scenery, and taste the delicious food? Look, in just a few months, Her Majesty had forgotten about Nan Yunchuan and was so concerned about him. This was the heart of an emperor. The word love was not worth mentioning to an emperor. He didn't believe that she didn't know about Nan Yunchuan's crazy appearance. She was the Empress, the Emperor of the West Holy Kingdom. If she wanted to know something, wouldn't it be easy? Su Qing thought of this and subconsciously asked, Your Majesty, do you still remember Yunchuan? After asking, he was a little annoyed. Why was it that every time he thought of this, he couldn't help but mention a person who shouldn't be mentioned in front of Her Majesty? He still paid attention to the Empress's expression without blinking. After asking, the smile in the Empress's eyes disappeared. She casually fiddled with her sleeves and asked, Why did you mention him? It's Su Qing who shouldn't have mentioned it. He shouldn't have known the truth behind Nan Yunchuan's death. The Empress had announced that Nan Yunchuan had died of illness, so he had died of illness. Su Qing lowered her eyes and said, When Brother Yunchuan was here, he was on good terms with me. I remember that a few months ago, His Majesty often thought of Brother Yunchuan who was recuperating outside the palace in front of Su Qing. Now, His Majesty treats Su Qing so well, no different from Brother Yunchuan back then. So, you ask this because you want to know whether I care about Yunchuan or you, right? Su Qing saw that the Empress was not angry and admitted, "Yes, because I don't want to be Brother Yunchuan's substitute. If your Majesty treats me like this because of Brother Yunchuan, then Su Qing is guilty. You worry too much. You are you, and Yunchuan is Yunchuan." Su Qing noticed that the Empress in front of her seemed to have lowered her voice. "Yunchuan, it's already over." Her soft sigh made Su Qing not know if she should continue this topic. Because he discovered that when the Empress mentioned Nanyun River, her eyes were filled with regret, and not hatred. At this time, he couldn't tell the difference. He remembered that Nan Yunchuan had betrayed the Empress, but the Empress didn't kill him. This was already the greatest tolerance as an emperor. So the question he asked just now was really a bit stupid. "Su Qing, I want to hear you play the guqin." Su Qing quickly took out the guqin, looked at the scenery outside the carriage, and played a suitable song. Chapter 9:17. He would occasionally glance at the Empress's expression and found that she was indeed enjoying his zither music. At the same time, he also found that the Empress treated him differently from Nan Yunchuan. She was more appreciative of him or appreciative of his talents. When she was in front of Nan Yunchuan, she would often be amused by Nan Yunchuan's interesting stories, even if it was shallow. Su Qing was stunned. It turned out that Her Majesty did not have any feelings for him. She only admired his talent, or perhaps she had some pity for him. Looking at the harem, the only ones who could talk to Her Majesty were him and Nan Yunchuan. Perhaps, Her Majesty did not have any feelings for Nan Yunchuan, but because they were different. The Empress was willing to get along with them because of their sincerity. She was also willing to give them grace, pamper them, flatter them, trust them, and give them a transcendent status that was different from others. "Stop, Su Qing. Your zither music is messed up." Su Qing was shocked. Only then did she realize that he was distracted and made a mistake. She quickly stopped. "Your Majesty, please forgive me. Don't forgive me so easily. How can there be such rules when you come out to play?" Su Qing quickly smiled. "Yes." At this moment, he vaguely understood that the Empress was a lonely person. He and Nan Yunchuan were the most sincere among the people in the harem. This was the reason why the Empress treated them well. The Empress did not have any feelings for them. Nan Yunchuan's betrayal, the Empress's sadness should be disappointment. The person she thought was sincere to her had betrayed her. However, she was not willing to kill Nan Yunchuan and help him. This was for the sake of their old friendship. The Empress, perhaps she really did not pay attention to Nan Yunchuan outside the palace. Su Qing had an indescribable feeling in her heart. It was the sudden stagger of the carriage that woke her up. "Your Majesty, what's going on?" Su Qing's face was vigilant, but her heart was very calm. The people he had arranged had arrived. Everything that had happened today had been carefully arranged by him. He no longer wanted to continue entangling with the Empress. The Empress could not be moved by him and could treat him very well. While he was scheming against the Empress, he was afraid that because of the Empress's kindness, he would lose his heart. Just like Nan Yunchuan, in the end, he became a crazy person who fiddled with old things all day. Tang Guo looked at the worried Su Qing and comforted her. "Don't be afraid, nothing will happen." She lifted the curtain of the carriage and walked out. Su Qing hurriedly followed him out. The current situation was that they were surrounded by masked men in black. The 4 experts brought by Tang Guo were entangled with the men in black. There were only 4 experts, and there were about 20 black-clothed men. The head chief had no choice but to personally go into battle to deal with the assassins. However, with only 5 people against 20 people, there was no way they could stop them. Seeing Tang Guo and Su Qing come out, the men in black looked at each other and raised their swords to attack Tang Guo. In an instant, Tang Guo quickly pulled out her sword and fought with the black-clothed man. Su Qing's background was music, chess, calligraphy, and painting since she was young. She did not know martial arts. At least on the surface, Su Qing could not know martial arts. Therefore, Tang Guo dragged Su Qing while dealing with the assassins. The system looked at Tang Guo's wonderful performance and could not help but praise, "Host, your acting is getting better and better. You can obviously strangle the throat with a sword, but you have to deal with it with difficulty. If I did not know the truth, I would have thought that you would not be able to hold on. Tongzi, you have been too bored recently." Chapter 9:18. Your Majesty, why don't you let me go and let the chief steward and the others cover you? You can escape first. After a quarter of an hour, the experts were also struggling. The chief steward was slightly injured. Fortunately, her martial arts skills were superb and she was careful to not lose her life. The signal had been sent out, but this place was very far from the imperial city. They did not know if the enemy had support. Without support, they would not be able to hold on for long. If there was support, this was simply a dead end. When the chief steward heard Su Qing's words, she quickly said, "Master, young Master Su is right. We will cover you. You go first." The other 4 experts nodded, indicating that they were willing to use their lives in exchange for Tang Guo's departure. Tang Guo grabbed Su Qing's wrist and smiled, "How can I leave you here? If I can't protect you, how can I rule the world?" Su Qing did not expect that the Empress would not give up on him at this time. He was an insignificant member of the harem. According to the Empress's interests, she should immediately abandon him. If she brought those experts, she could still rush out. "Your Majesty, you should let me go. I don't know martial arts and will only drag you down." However, Tang Guo did not let go. Instead, she grabbed his wrist and ordered the others, "We can't just sit still and wait for death. Rush out." The chief steward and the other 4 experts understood and began to rush out of the encirclement. After everyone's hard work, they finally opened a breakthrough. Tang Guo cut the rope pulling the carriage and took Su Qing on the horse. The rest of the people also jumped on the horse and rushed in a certain direction. Su Qing did not expect that the people around the Empress were so powerful. What he did not expect was that the Empress was even more powerful. He thought that these men in black were enough to deal with these people, so he did not arrange a backup plan. If the Empress really escaped, his plan today would be in vain. Therefore, after getting on the horse, he quickly turned around and looked at one of the men in black. He mouthed something. The black man saw Su Qing's mouth and nodded slightly. He quickly caught up and shouted, "Release the arrows." The chief steward's expression immediately changed. "Your Majesty, be careful. They are about to shoot." She and the other 4 people ran behind Tang Guo to block the flying arrows. For these experts, dodging the arrows of more than 20 people was not a problem. However, there would occasionally be fish that slipped through the net and flew to Tang Guo. Fortunately, Tang Guo's skills were not bad. She was able to dodge accurately every time. This time, Su Qing was very anxious. She could not find a chance to help her block the arrow. That's right, he had planned everything today in order to block an arrow for the Empress and completely leave a deep impression in the Empress' heart. In the future, he would no longer need to curry favor with the Empress. In order to make the Empress believe in his sincerity, he naturally had to show some sincerity so that he would not be suspected. To an emperor, life was extremely important. If he was willing to give up his life for her, then she would never be able to forget him for the rest of her life. What he wanted was the Empress's unconditional trust. Then, he could make use of this to carry out his plan. Su Qing had been waiting for an opportunity, and it had indeed come. Seeing that Tanggua had sent another arrow flying from behind, Su Qing looked at the arrow and smiled. She gently wrapped her arms around Tanggua's waist and was about to use her back to block the arrow. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.